Even with all the amazing strides we've made in the world, archaeologists are still uncovering shocking secrets. Today I'll be exploring some of the most incredible discoveries recently made. From a flooded tomb in Egypt to a legendary city uncovered in the Amazon jungle. Plus I'll be setting the record straight about how the pyramids were built. The flooded tomb. After 3,500 years, an incredible tomb from ancient Egypt was recently opened. Researchers were hoping to find mummies still preserved safely inside their sarcophagi. Instead, archaeologists opened a tomb to discover a disgusting soup of ancient human remains. When I say soup, I really mean soup. The Egyptian team of archaeologists found a tomb about 40 miles north of Aswan at a place called Gebel el-Silsila. In the 18th dynasty of Egypt, the site was used as a major quarry. Stone was excavated and shipped up and down the Nile. Maybe the people buried in this tomb were workers at the quarry, or maybe they were government officials in charge of the projects. Nobody really knows. They were buried nicely once and at peace, but not anymore. John Ward and his wife Dr. Maria Nielsen were involved in the disturbing discovery. John said the tomb is at the bottom of a shaft about 16 feet deep. The shaft alone would have taken an immense amount of work to complete. The tunnel was carved through solid bedrock, but when the archaeologists got down into the tomb, they found it flooded with briny water. The mummies had become dislodged from their burial places and mixed up in the flood water. There are 2 chambers within the tomb, each one of them flooded. Archaeologists had to wade through the sloppy mix of human remains and what was most likely spring water that seeped into the underground burial. It's going to be very difficult to get any kind of usable information from an actual soup of human. However, researchers did manage to salvage some artifacts from the water. They found 3 sarcophagi, one containing the remains of a small child. The second sarcophagus contained the body of an infant, and so did the third. Everyone else's bones are just sort of floating around like bath toys. Italian stoners. A new study has shown that in the 17th century, Italians were smoking a lot of pot. It's no wonder the Renaissance was such a mind-expanding time in Europe. Researchers investigated the crypt of a renowned hospital in Milano from the 1600s, analyzing bone samples from patients who were buried there. Scientists were focused specifically on whether the patients had been using cannabis. After analyzing the femoral bones of 9 individuals, researchers reached their conclusion. Yes, some of them were on the reefer. The toxicological results show that 2 out of the 9 individuals used cannabinoids prior to their deaths. The other 7 individuals may have used it as well, just not in the days before they died. Scientists are now trying to figure out if the cannabis was for fun or if it was medicinal. Researchers think the patients were either treated with cannabis while in the hospital or were given the plant by a doctor outside the hospital. In other words, sick and wounded Italians were seeking alternative medicine in the form of marijuana. Either that or hospitals were dishing the stuff out to relieve pain. The one thing that's for sure is that the population of Milano, and undoubtedly all of Italy, were exposed to the pot plant. This shouldn't come as a huge surprise to those who know their marijuana history. The hemp plant was ubiquitous in ancient Greece and Rome. There are plenty of examples of weed used since the earliest days of human history. There are also records from the Middle Ages of the plant being banned in Europe and in other places being used medicinally and therapeutically. Where did Europeans get all their weed? It was often brought to Europe from the East or from Africa. The Cult of Mithra. In Germany, archaeologists have found a cultic site where one of the weirdest gods of the ancient world was worshipped. His name was Mithras, god of light to the Romans. His sanctuary was just unearthed in Trier, which is in the southwest of the country. The discovery was made totally by accident when the city started work on a new fire station. The type of temple is called a Mithraeum. Before the rise in popularity of Christianity, Mithraeums were as popular across the empire as churches are across Europe today. But by the end of the 4th century, the cult of Jesus Christ had surpassed all other religions in Rome. The mystery cults vanished, the gods of Olympus were forgotten, and many Mithraeums were torn down and replaced with Christian churches. Examples of these sanctuaries have been found across Europe. There's even one in London that you can visit. But the ruins just discovered in Germany have proved particularly exciting. Archaeologists uncovered a massive limestone relief of Cautus. He was one of the most important characters in Mithraic myth. It's extremely rare to find an intact statue of any figure from Mithraism. Here's the scoop on this ancient religion. The first thing you need to know is that Mithra was not created by the Romans. He was a god in the Indo-Iranian world long before the rise of the Roman Empire. Some scholars think Mithra was one of the oldest deities in the world. He was worshipped by Iranian tribes as the god of friendship and harmony and sunlight. Sunlight was his most important characteristic. When Mithraism spread into the Roman Empire, they worshipped Mithra as a god of light. Soldiers in the Roman army were particularly fond of Mithra because they believed worshipping him would bring them victory on the battlefield. Mithra was the main deity, but he had his friends. He had two torch-bearing companions named Cortes and Cortopates. His companions symbolized the duality of the world. They represented the sunrise and the sunset, the summer and the winter, and life and death. One holds the torch up, the flame burning brightly. The other holds the torch down, the flame extinguished. The Tomb of Chinxiwang. Who do you think had the most impressive tombs? The early emperors of ancient China or the early pharaohs of ancient Egypt? It's a question with no correct answer because both civilizations built incredible funerary complexes. The mausoleum of Chinxiwang is so epic that it still hasn't been fully explored. It has been over 2,200 years, and the emperor is still sealed tightly in his tomb. Archaeologists are too afraid to open it. Why are archaeologists afraid to open a tomb? Isn't that their whole shtick? It's because, according to legend, the emperor's tomb is filled with booby traps. Tripwires that set off crossbows, pressure plates that release poison gas. You know, typical tomb booby traps. Chinxiwang is most famous for being the legendary unifier of ancient China. He gave himself the title Huangdi, which means sovereign sage emperor in English. His very name is where the country gets its name from. Qin, pronounced like Chin, is the base of the name China. When the great emperor died in 210 BC, he was buried inside a magnificent mausoleum. The pyramids were impressive, but Qin's luxurious burial plot is ridiculously massive. It covers almost 4 square miles, with only a small percentage of it being explored so far. The most famous part of his mausoleum is his collection of terracotta warriors. First unearthed in 1974, there have been over 8,000 life-size terracotta warriors found, but the Great Tomb itself remains sealed. Archaeologists have never physically broken open the central chamber where the emperor's body lies to this day. At least it's presumed the emperor's body is in there. Scientists won't know for sure until they open it, and that's most likely never going to happen. The thing is that in China, Chinxiwang is the most important person in their history. He was the one who birthed the nation. The decision-makers in the country are not going to let archaeologists disturb the great emperor's final resting place, not so they can poke at his bones and put his treasure in a museum. Speaking of treasure, his tomb is likely filled with more riches than even the greediest pirate could load onto a ship. According to ancient historian Sima Qian, who lived shortly after the emperor's death, the mausoleum was filled with rare artifacts and incredible treasure, but it was also filled with mercury and set with crossbows to shoot the first people through the door of the tomb. Sima Qian also wrote that it took 700,000 laborers to complete the mausoleum. That's 7 times more men than it took to build the Pyramid of Giza. As for recent discoveries, not very many have been made. There have been a few suggestions to use non-invasive techniques to look inside the tomb. Archaeologists could use X-rays, but they haven't been given permission. And now for number 12, but first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Digital Art Crafts and Newbie7878 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Prehistoric Vegetarians. An incredible discovery has revealed the truth of prehistoric vegetarians. It turns out people have been shying away from meat for a bit longer than previously thought. High in the mountains of South America, prehistoric hunters weren't sitting outside their caves munching on raw mutton. Some of them, by choice, were munching on salads. Randy Haas is an archaeology professor from the University of Wyoming. He led an incredible effort to research 24 corpses discovered at a series of sites across Peru. Randy was able to find out what the people were eating by analyzing the wear pattern on their teeth and the isotopic composition of their bones. The 24 individuals lived between 9,000 and 6,500 years ago. Their diets consisted of roughly 80% plant matter and 20% meat. Not just any plant matter though. Tooth analysis revealed the people chewed on a lot of tubers. Tubers are plants that grow underground, sort of like potatoes, but they fell out of fashion with the end of the Stone Age. What scientists don't know is why the people of the Peruvian Andes ate more plants than they did meat. The evidence proves they embraced a primarily plant-based diet, despite there being ample access to mammals for eating. Were they vegetarians on purpose? Were they just lazy? Or maybe they preferred the taste of tubers to the taste of prime rib. Another Amazonian city. Yet another Amazonian city has been discovered deep in the jungle. If you've been paying attention to recent discoveries or watching a lot of the channel, you've no doubt heard about new cities found in the Amazon and other jungles. Cities are being uncovered in Mexico, Guatemala, and South America with startling frequency. And now scientists have announced yet another humongous city. This one flourished about 2,500 years ago and had an estimated 100,000 people in it. The Amazon is big, mysterious, and hard to explore. Scientists have estimated 90% of human history in the Amazon is gone. It's been swallowed by the jungle and will never be found, but it's still worth looking for. Scientists from the French National Center for Scientific Research recently turned to Ecuador's Opano Valley for signs of ancient life. The Opano Valley is situated along the edge of the foothills of the Andes, a verdant landscape between mountain and jungle. Researchers were able to map 115 square miles using LIDAR technology. They essentially strapped lasers to a helicopter and scanned the forest floor, hoping to discover hidden ruins. And yes, they hit the jackpot. One of the researchers involved, Antoine Dorison, told the BBC that this discovery changes the way experts view Amazonian cultures. The ancient people of the Amazon were not small groups living in huts and wearing loincloths. They built fantastic cities, bigger and more powerful than the ones in Europe at the same time. Scientists are calling the newly found city Sangay, though it's impossible to say what the original occupants called it. They lived in the city from about 500 BC until 600 AD, when they vanished without a trace. The nameless civilization left behind streets, drainage systems, and highways connecting smaller settlements across the valley floor. Where did they go? What catastrophe caused the total collapse of the Amazon's great kingdoms? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The oldest papyri. One of the greatest discoveries of the modern era occurred a few years ago in a cave. A team of scientists from France and Egypt were exploring the rocky cliffs and dark caverns near Wadi al-Jarf on the edge of the Red Sea when they uncovered the oldest papyri in the nation. The ancient text was already impressive because of its age, but when archaeologists deciphered the words on the shriveled papers, they realized they had hit the mother lode. The scraps of papyri are a legitimate record of the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I can't explain in words just how important of a discovery this was. Forget about every conspiracy theory involving the construction of the pyramids. You can also go ahead and forget all the supposed mystery surrounding how they were built. This real historical document, written 4,500 years ago, is basically a receipt. It says exactly how the pyramids were built. The find was so exciting that Egyptologists Pierre Tallet and Gregory Marouard published a detailed article about it in the journal Near Eastern Archaeology. The papyri are from a logbook that was written in the 27th year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign. This was the pharaoh who was buried inside the Great Pyramid. The record was written while he still lived. In hieroglyphics, a building inspector named Merer recorded the construction operations. He wrote that work on the pyramid was nearing its end. Work at the limestone quarries of Tura was going well. He also detailed the timetable for construction and compiled daily reports from the workers. The papyri even confirms one very important detail that scientists have suspected for a while. The text says in plain ancient Egyptian that the pyramid stones were transported by boat up the Nile River, then along a system of canals directly to the construction site. It wasn't even that big of a journey. From the quarry to the pyramid only took about 2 days. The papyri are broken into 800 extremely fragile fragments. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquity has already placed over 100 of them into glass frames and put them on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. You can see the documents for yourself on your next visit to Egypt. Merer even recorded the name of the construction project manager. A vizier by the name of Ankaef, the half-brother of the pharaoh, was the man in charge of the whole project. It wasn't the only project on the go either. There was a harbor being built along the Mediterranean Sea. Egypt was in full build mode. I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but the document proves the Great Pyramid was built by ordinary men, not aliens. The Prehistoric Apocalypse. 8,000 years ago, prehistoric people living on Britain's coastline got a very rude awakening. A tsunami estimated to be over 60 feet tall crashed into the shore and wiped out entire communities. It was an event that even by modern standards would be horrific and devastating. For Stone Age people, it was the apocalypse. Scientists at the University of York found evidence of not just a tsunami, but the consequences it had on prehistoric civilization. The tsunami appears to have been caused by an underwater landslide off the coast of Norway. Sediment deposits from the event have been found in northern England, suggesting a tsunami of biblical proportions. It was so big that trace sediments have been found all the way in Greenland. According to Dr. John Hill, the tsunami devastated coastal communities, especially because it likely occurred in autumn. Summer was over, the last few berries were being picked from bushes, and suddenly the ocean rose like an angry god and destroyed peaceful seaside communities. John said the scale of the waves would have been unprecedented. It was something the people had never seen or even heard of before. With their settlements destroyed and winter fast approaching, it was bad news for anyone who survived. Archaeologists also found evidence of a sudden drop in population. Looking at sites across northwestern Europe from 8,000 years ago, researchers identified a sudden lack of people. Settlements shrunk, fishing villages evaporated, and human activity slowed way down. Archaeologists think the tsunami caused such widespread damage, it had a lasting effect on the population. Decoding a lost script. When you think of Buddhism, which country comes to mind first? Maybe it's China, where Buddhism is widely practiced today. Or maybe you think of Thailand, land of smiles and golden pagodas. The one place you don't really think of is Uzbekistan, once home to the Kushan Empire, and one of the most important places in early Buddhist history. It was the Kushan Empire who spread Buddhism into East Asia about 1800 years ago. The Kushan Empire formed in the 1st century AD, at around the same time the Roman Empire formed. It quickly spread across a vast region, from Uzbekistan to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. They were largely Indo-European, meaning they were likely nomads who migrated from northwestern China and settled in the lands of Bactria. They had Greek ideas, but also embraced Hinduism and Buddhism. Emperor Kanishka was also a large fan of Zoroastrianism and incorporated elements of the lost religion into the empire. I'm throwing all these names at you like you're supposed to know them all, but don't feel bad if you don't. The Kushan Empire was powerful enough to rival the Romans, and their territory was nearly as large. But they've never achieved the same fame as the Romans in modern media. Most people have never heard of them before, and definitely not the names of their emperors and territories. As the Kushan Empire pushed Buddhism across Central Asia and into China, they ushered in a lasting period of peace. For 200 years, there was tranquility and harmony between the kingdoms. They even have diplomatic ties and trading contacts within the Roman Empire, the Aksumite Empire, and the Han Dynasty in China. The Kushan only fell apart when pressed on all sides by invaders who hated peace. You might be wondering what all this has to do with a recent discovery. Well, it's a big one. For the first time, archaeologists believe they have decoded the mysterious script of the Kushan people. It's as important of a discovery as the Rosetta Stone was when it allowed researchers to decode Egyptian hieroglyphics. The first evidence of the Kushan script was found in the 1950s, scrawled on the side of an ancient stairway in Afghanistan. In the 1960s, French archaeologists found a trilingual script written on a boulder at Dasht-i-Nawar, also in Afghanistan. But it wasn't until 2023 that researchers finally translated the Kushan script. They did so by comparing it to the Bactrian and Gandhari script written on the same stone. The decoding of the script just happened, so there isn't too much information about it. Researchers will hopefully, going forward in 2024, be able to start translating previously indecipherable Kushan texts, learning more about this lost kingdom. The Jade Mask. Chokhitam is not a big name when it comes to ancient cities, but it might be soon. One of the most amazing artifacts from the Maya world was just found here, recovered from a pyramid tomb. Archaeologists discovered a beautiful jade mask of such impressive craftsmanship it likely has no equal. They think it may have been the burial mask of a mighty king nobody's ever heard of before. Finding the jade mask was not an easy task. Unfortunately, the tomb was already looted when archaeologists from the University of Alabama were performing their excavation. Raiders had cleaned the tomb out, leaving nothing but scraps in the dirt for archaeologists to collect. The researchers found some pieces of bone carved in Maya hieroglyphs from about 350 AD. Then, as the archaeologists searched the dusty floor of the tomb for potential treasure, they started finding tiny blocks of jade. They took all these tiny pieces back to their laboratory and realized they were part of a puzzle. Scientists were dealing with a puzzle from almost 2,000 years ago, and they didn't even have the box to look at the picture. It took a lot of creative work, but the archaeologists were successful. They put the single blocks of jade together to form what's known as a mosaic mask. Unlike most funerary masks that were carved from a single piece of material, this one was made of jade plates. It's like a 3D puzzle. The mask is an extremely rare artifact, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of discovery. Now archaeologists just need to figure out who the mask belonged to. They think the pillaged tomb was likely made for a king of Chokhitam, but it's still unknown. An ancient Roman bullet. It's a classic cliché we've all seen before. The hero writes the name of their nemesis on their bullet and vows vengeance. The cliché has been around for 2,000 years. In the days of ancient Rome, people wrote names on bullets too. Archaeologists have found a bullet in Spain with the name of Caesar inscribed on it. You might be a little confused, wondering how Romans had bullets 2,000 years ago. By bullet, I mean a small piece of lead that was flung from a slingshot. Slingshots are seriously deadly weapons in the right hands. Romans were trained to use slingshots like guns, flinging tiny pellets of lead at incredible speeds. Ancient Roman bullets weren't just for killing, they were also used to send a message. The bullet found in Spain with the name of Caesar on it was likely part of the Roman Civil War that broke out between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. The Civil War lasted from 49 to 45 BC. Caesar refused to give up the armies he had acquired over the past decade while campaigning in Gaul. Pompey wanted the Senate to strip Caesar of his power. The two big men divided the Republic in half, each one refusing to back down. In the opening days of the war, Caesar marched his army straight into Rome to take it for himself. But the fighting didn't stay in Rome. Battles spread across Roman territory, in Italy, Greece, Africa, and Spain. After 4 long years, Caesar won the war and became the first emperor of the Roman Empire. During the fighting in Spain, most of the regions had sided with Pompey. It's believed the newly found bullet was from a supporter of Pompey who had carved Caesar's name on the bullet. It was likely meant as an insult. Someone was trying to tell Caesar to get lost and go home. AngloSaxon Burials. Since 2020, the world's longest land and subsea interconnector project has been steadily revealing archaeological treasures. The project involves installing submarine and subterranean cables from the UK to Denmark. They're not just laying cable though, they're uncovering history. They've already dug up 50 archaeological sites. The most recent find has been a big one. Archaeologists just unveiled an incredible cemetery from the Anglo-Saxons with over 20 skeletons. The graves were found in Lincolnshire. Along with the skeletons, archaeologists uncovered over 250 artifacts. Grave goods in the form of knives, pieces of pottery, and jewelry. The artifacts allowed experts to date the cemetery to the 6th century AD, to a time when England was undergoing serious cultural changes. When the Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, England fell into a period known as the Dark Ages. It's called the Dark Ages because there are very few written records during the years after Rome lost control of Britain. Most of what archaeologists know about this time comes from archaeology. Around 410, the Anglo-Saxons started arriving on British shores. By the 6th century, the Anglo-Saxons were the dominant force in the UK. Britain broke apart into many different kingdoms, which warred with one another until a new problem arose. The new problem was the Vikings in 790 AD. The newly uncovered cemetery could help reveal what life was like for the Anglo-Saxons before the Vikings arrived and caused unspeakable chaos. Researchers will be analyzing the skeletons to learn more about their everyday life. Stay tuned to the channel for updates. A mysterious figure. An exceedingly unusual figure was recently found in Turkey. The statue of a male humanoid was discovered at one of the oldest temples in the world. There are so many juicy bits of information from this discovery, I don't even know where to start. Let's kick it off with the statue itself. The statue is of a man holding on to his reproductive organ with both hands like it might try to run away from him. The statue is almost 8 feet tall, making it larger than life. Researchers think the figure may have been the leader of a social group, maybe the chief of an ancient clan. It may have also been carved in the image of an early fertility god. Scientists don't know. Ted Banning from the University of Toronto told Live Science that any interpretation of the statue is purely conjecture. All right, the statue is a little creepy, but it's also hugely important to the history of humanity. It was found at a temple that was built 11,000 years ago. The site of Karahan Tepe is older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and older than any other complex human site outside Turkey. It's ancient, with its mysteries seemingly infinite. Nobody knows who built the temple, and nobody knows who carved the unusual statue. Archaeologists also identified the life-size statue of a wild boar, suggesting boars were very important to whoever lived here. Some believe Karahan Tepe was part of an advanced civilization that was destroyed by the biblical flood. An ancient mansion in Israel. In the Israel desert, a place that doesn't do much for the eyes, archaeologists found a slice of luxury. Amidst the hot stones and loose sand, very wealthy people used to live in extreme comfort. Researchers turned up a mansion from 1,200 years ago. The discovery was made in the ancient Bedouin city of Rahat, established in the early part of the Islamic era in the 8th century. The mansion is every bit as impressive as you would expect. It was built around a central courtyard, the home divided into 4 major wings. The courtyard branched into a residential area, a place that may have been used for slaves, and heaps of other rooms. The corridors were lined with precious marble. There were intricate decorations set into the walls. It's hard to imagine now because the mansion is decimated, the only thing left being some fragments of its foundations. But when the house was built, it would have been the ancient equivalent of a Beverly Hills manor. Archaeologists even found stone vaults underneath the courtyard. The underground vaults were likely to store food in since it was cooler down there. The vaults also would have given the owners of the mansion a place to cool off during hot days in the desert. Researchers believe the owners of the mansion must have been wildly rich. They must have had high status in the community, though there are no specific details about who they were or how they could afford such a place. Mostly garbage. Imagine pouring all your energy into an archaeological excavation and finding nothing. Sometimes that's the harsh reality archaeologists deal with. A recent dig on the island of Guernsey led to the discovery of mostly garbage. Guernsey is located in the Channel Islands, 27 miles from the coast of Normandy in France. Its history is long and complex. Because of its position between England and mainland Europe, it has changed hands a whole heap of times. It was part of the Duchy of Normandy up until 1204. In 1290, the island became part of a self-governing British Crown dependency. Then in World War II, the Nazis invaded. They stayed on the island for 5 long years until the war was over. In the aftermath, Guernsey went back to being a dependency of the Crown. It's not technically part of the UK, even though the British monarch is the head of the state. Renowned archaeologist Dr. Phil de Jersey started the dig with high hopes. He believed traces of an ancient settlement would be found on the edge of the island. His idea was that in the distant past, people crossed to the island using a land bridge that has since disappeared, lost to the raging sea. The excavation started at the end of 2023. A couple of pieces of medieval pottery were discovered, but nothing ancient. The archaeologists excavated several trenches, looked desperately for clues, and left disappointed. Dr. Phil de Jersey said all they really found was household trash from the 19th and 20th centuries. In the world of archaeology, sometimes that's just the way it goes. Prehistoric syndromes. Scientists are making leaps and bounds in the identification of prehistoric genetic conditions. For the first time, a prehistoric person with Turner syndrome has been identified. Researchers used a new computational method to measure sex chromosomes in prehistoric bones. The team looked at various skeletons from the Iron Age to the medieval days. They identified one person with Turner syndrome, somebody with Jacobs syndrome, 3 people with Klinefelter syndrome, and an infant with Down syndrome. Study co-author Kakia Anastasiadou said it's still too difficult to see a full picture of how these people interacted with their society. Experts don't know if they were shunned or if they experienced great hardship because of their syndromes. Still, simply finding people with these syndromes is a big step forward. It's discoveries like these that push scientists closer to understanding the complex history of human biology. One of the biggest issues biologists face when dealing with something like Turner syndrome is that they don't understand where it came from. Why did syndromes that affect the X and Y chromosomes in people's genes suddenly start happening? What was the point of Down syndrome entering the human genetic code? These questions are still not answered, but scientists do have evidence of the oldest case of Turner syndrome now. The proof was found in a skeleton of a young adult female from the early Iron Age, roughly 2,500 years ago. Some of the woman's cells had only one X chromosome, while the other had the normal 2 X chromosomes. If she were alive today, she would need to undergo estrogen replacement therapy to trigger puberty and to boost her height. But 2,500 years ago, there wouldn't have been therapy solutions. This woman would have suffered delayed growth, likely never entered puberty, and never started menstruating. What are your thoughts on these awesome new discoveries? Let me know in the comments. And thanks a lot for watching. Be sure to come back soon for more incredible videos from the channel. And don't forget to subscribe. See you then. Bye.